Welcome to Encouragement for Living Life with Lockwood and Lockwood. The guys are here to encourage you in your attempt to live more confidently and successfully in our world. They are highly trained and experienced mental health professionals, but they are not your mental health professional. They are sharing encouragement through information and discussion. People are complex. Just because an idea helps one person doesn't mean it will help someone else. You need to consult with your own professional who will hopefully know what is best for you in your situation. Now, it's time for Lockwood and Lockwood.
What is a healthy relationship? Welcome, everybody, to podcast number 20 for us. Who knows when this will come out, what order will be in, but, it's here. And I don't know about you, son, but I'm glad to see more sunshine. I guess you guys probably had sunshine much sooner than us.
We're getting more clouds right now, but yeah.
Are you? Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, usually I go to Florida for 2 weeks in January to get a little sunshine to help me through till spring. So I've been really glad spring's here and getting some sunshine because I'm like a watch that's been wound down. And
Mm.
it's nice to get some sun to get wound up again.
Mm.
Anyway, we're going to talk about what is a healthy relationship. And I know there's all different kinds of relationship. I always remember this case I had referred to me. I was therapist number 5, and it was short-lived. I didn't do real well with them. I'm not sure who did, but I didn't do real well with them. And I swear to God, they stayed close to each other by arguing.
Hmm.
That's how they stayed close. So they
Hmm.
argued in front of me, and you really couldn't do a whole lot, or at least I couldn't do a whole lot about it. And after I think 1 or 2 sessions, I became number 5 that failed, and they went on to number 6. They already had someone else in mind to try, so they went on number 6. So I'm really, part of me's always been curious: did they ever find anybody that could help them find a way to be close without having to argue to do it?
Yeah.
But like I said, there's all kinds of relationships that work to varying degrees. Not my idea of a good time, but work to varying degrees anyway. So just keep that in mind as we go. Now, I started off after that little vignette. What is love? You know? Do you remember? Do you know what I used to tell your mom when we were
Mm.
dating?
Yeah.
Love's a commitment, not a feeling. And I don't know kind of where I got that, but some common sense, some experiences I had. But feelings in a relationship are based on how you treat each other and
Hmm.
how you treat yourself.
Hmm.
Like your mom is not responsible for my happiness and I'm not responsible for hers. Now we both, contribute to obviously to the relationship, but commitment was a big thing for me. And I want to try and sell that to people who are listening. If you're people of faith, you already know about that. But I want to sell it whether you're a person of faith or not. Because a commitment has one really important quality that helps a relationship last. It forces you, if you're committed in the relationship, it forces you to try and resolve the conflict so you don't stay in pain. If you don't have commitment and you can dump the relationship because it's not quote unquote meeting your needs or there's so much conflict or etc., then
Hmm.
you have less incentive to try and resolve what's going on. So I think commitment kind of corners the relationship. It kind of contains it like an offense. So it puts some pressure, hopefully in a good way. Not, I'm sure it's not always taken like that,
Right.
but hopefully in a good way to force people to look at what's going on. What do we have to change to resolve these painful conflicts or things that are going on that are creating pain, that are not allowing one or both people to get what they need in the relationship. And I call that the power of commitment. The commitment can be a really good thing. And so I highly want to sell that to people who are listening versus the throwaway culture that we have today. Well, they're no longer meeting my needs, which leads to my next point, by the way. I don't know if you have something to say about commitment, or whether you just kind of accept that's a good thing or not. But it leads to the next point. What is love? You know, is love about getting or is it about giving? What do you think, son? What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think a couple of things are true. So on the one hand, um, hmm, lots of things to say.
Good.
So So
Cool.
I agree that commitment is important. I'm not a big fan of the word love. I understand people use it all the time
Mm-hmm.
in movies and songs and books and things like that.
Everywhere.
The
Can't escape it.
problem,
Can't escape it,
yeah,
son.
the problem I have with that from a technical perspective is I don't think people are using the word to mean the same thing. And so you're making your own definition here, which is love is something that's centered on or built on the concept of commitment. And so
Correct.
I'm definitely in favor of commitment. I think commitment is extremely important for most people in most situations.
Okay.
However, I think commitment in and of itself is not synonymous with love, I guess you could say. I think it's like there's a combination of multiple things that go into what people like the average person, at least in the West. I don't know about other cultures, but in the West, Europe, United States, Canada, parts of South America, I think a lot of Western folks see love as commitment plus some sense of care, some sense of like, I have feelings of concern and interest in you and or about you. And those feelings of concern and interest have some existential meaning to them because there's a difference between like in my opinion, there's a radical difference actually between I have temporary feelings about you because you're attractive or you're successful or nice to me or something of that nature. Those temporary feelings are very, very important because they build bridges in the moment. I think when people talk about care, usually what they're talking about existentially is there's some greater purpose to these feelings of interest and concern and hope, usually. So it's like a combination of interest, concern, and hope is what I would call care. So I think
Okay.
a combination of commitment and care in the way that I define it is something like what people mean when they say the word love. That's the way I think about it.
I think that's a nice way to think about it for people. Interest, concern, care. If that's not there, it's a pretty empty relationship, I think.
Yeah, why be
You
committed
know?
then?
Yeah, yeah, right. Why be committed? It was really my next point here, which will fit into that actually really nicely, is needs. As part of what, I call love, needs like interest, concern, care. That's part of what got your mom to sleep next to me in a rocker recliner after my surgery on my knee. You know, concern and care, but also fear of feeling guilty if I fell when I got up at first, and I
Sure.
think she overdid it out of her fear of feeling guilty, but interest and concern and care were a big part of doing that, obviously. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I always look at a little bit coldly a relationship as an economy. I don't want to use economic terms when a relationship, but I believe both parties have needs. And I
Yeah.
believe that the more those needs are set, I'm talking about need, I'm not talking about wants. We'll get to wants next. But I'm talking about needs. What do people really need from each other? So if I know what my wife needs, that helps me meet her need. Like for years, being a guy, if she brought home a problem from work, well, what was I going to try and do with it?
Mm.
Solve it. Typical guy move, right? Let's solve the problem here. Where the vast majority of the time, your mom simply wanted me to hear her and understand what she was experiencing at work. See? Until later on when she wanted to retire, and then complaining was just a voice to say, I'm ready to go. You know what I'm saying? But before that, just hear me out. Understand what I'm experiencing there. That was her need, to be understood, to be appreciated, for what she was experiencing. And I believe that's a really legitimate, important need. Where me, I didn't need that with work. She'd ask me how my day was, and I'd be like, it was fine. It was fine. Or it was good, and there were no details forthcoming typically. Occasionally there would be, But most of the time, no, I'm done. I've been listening all day. I don't need to talk about it. I'm fine. But we're going to go back to someone you don't like a lot, do you have some feelings about, but Dobson defined a couple of basic needs that men have and women have to use this model, okay? And I know I condense it into the most important needs that guys and gals have, just for sake of brevity with this one.
Yeah.
Women tend to be, he says, research says, self-worth and appreciation. That to build up their self-worth. And I had a guy in the office last night with his girlfriend. I go, she's been kind of down and depressed and struggling with work. Needs to find a new job. But what she really needs from him is encouragement. She's really good. I'd hire her in a minute to do lots of things because she's really got some really cool characteristics, but she's been beaten up a lot by some circumstances that have gone on for a couple of years, physical and related to family and stuff like that. So she just needs encouragement to get back on the track of finding a better job for herself with
Sure.
the good benefits that she needs. She really doesn't need anything else. She doesn't need to be held accountable or anything like that, and just some encouragement, which builds back her self-worth to make it easier for her to then look for jobs and expect to have something good come from them. As my patient said, she needs a win right now. And I go, I know, but she may not get one. That's why I'm saying encouragement. Build her up, keep building her up, and then it'll get easier for her to look for a job. And then, of course, appreciate what she's been doing, which is a little bit harder because she's been so down. She hasn't been as active in the relationship, so appreciation is a little bit harder to come by right now. But there's a lot to appreciate overall. Really, really good young lady. And then men. So there's 1 and 2 for women typically on a survey. Men, sex. Unless you're my age and my physical condition, then this goes to number 2, but it's number 1 typically. And respect, which is the same as appreciation for women, different word for men typically. Respect, real important. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of already beat me to it a little bit
Okay,
because
well,
one of the points I was going to make is you talked about appreciation and respect, and they are essentially, I think, the same thing. I think it'd be really
yeah,
just pedantic to try and split hairs. So
right.
when I think about what people need, 2 categories of needs that people have. So before we talk about like sex and gender differences, if we just talk about the basic universal stuff, everyone needs some sense of reliability and consistency, shelter, food, you know, basic physical needs, if you want to call them that.
Well, amen. Yeah, you
That's
bet.
that's that's universal. Doesn't matter what culture you come from. Different cultures go about getting those needs met differently, but we all have the same basic needs for security, a future, survival, food, shelter, blah blah blah. That I think is unsophisticated and not very scandalous or something. But I think what humans need in relationships and intimate relationships, I think of infants a lot, right? So I think
Okay.
of there's this, in my opinion, you might disagree, I don't know. In my opinion, I think that, and this might be a little too deep for this particular podcast, we can certainly keep it more shallow if you want. I think that what happens in all intimate
I
relationships is
love you,
people
son.
people tend to play out their infantile needs with their romantic partner, and that's not necessarily pathological. Because as you just said, admiration and respect, right?
Basic.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a basic thing that you start to learn at age 0, not at age 4 or 7 or 10 or when you win your first trophy or something like that. That starts to happen at age 0, right?
Right. Right.
And so what I think of is we live a kind of absurd life where because we're adults, we don't need infantile things, right? So like,
Oh, can I give an example?
yeah, sure, of
Because I
course.
got a bad example for
I'm
you
sure.
growing up with us. To feel safe is one thing, and I think probably being around me in terms of external people hurting people, you would feel safe. Not necessarily with me at the time because of the issues I had, but economic insecurity, money stress, I think weighed heavily on our family. I
Mm,
could not solve that problem then when you guys were growing up. And we're going to do a podcast on how to be successful financially.
yeah,
But that's a basic need for kids to feel safe, for a spouse to feel safe, and for some basic sense of security. You're talking about the infile need of security. Well, financially, if you're chronically under stress, it puts tremendous stress in a relationship. And we know statistically by research, one of the greatest issues that leads to divorce, financial stress.
yeah,
Because I can tell you before and after. It's stressful when you're down to $100 in your account and you
yeah,
got a week to live and stuff like that. And that kind of
yeah.
stress, and I don't know how much you're aware of that, but that I think weighed heavily in our family because
Mm,
I could not solve that problem. And it wasn't about my income. I kept making more and still couldn't solve it.
right.
So anyway, but that fits into what you're talking about with infantile needs, security, safety. Go
Yeah.
on and go on.
Yeah, I would say that there's a variety of psychological and physical infantile needs that
Sure.
become, how would you say, they become more refined and complicated as you become an adult and
Of
mature.
course.
And I
Right.
think that people tend to believe that because you're an adult, you don't have those same needs. That's not true, in my opinion. In my opinion,
Oh, no, you're right.
we
You're right.
have the same needs, but we need to get them met in more mature ways, right? So infants want to feel special, for instance. And obviously,
Right.
people are built differently. Some people are more narcissistic or whatever, but all of that aside, everyone needs to feel special, right? There needs to be something
Right.
special about you, right? It doesn't mean that you're the most special person on the planet, obviously, but I mean, in some cases, people want that, but that's not a need, right? You
No,
have
that's
a
not a need.
you have a you have a basic need to be special. You have a basic need to be important psychologically. You have a
There you go.
basic need to be safe psychologically. You have a basic need to feel free or have agency, if you want to call it that, psychologically. So these are all psychological needs that you start developing as literally an infant at age 0, and
Hmm.
hopefully, as you mature and get smarter and develop more skills, you just get these needs met in more complicated ways in relationships, more adult ways, right? So
More
as an
adult
infant,
ways.
you just cry and make everyone's life hell to get what you need. But as an adult, in theory at least, what you do as an adult is you maybe assert yourself. You use assertive language to explain what you believe you need, and then you negotiate. So what adults do
Right.
is negotiate. What infants do is they terrorize. They use their they use their loud crying, they protest, they scream, they wail, they don't have agency, they don't have complicated language. They're not that smart. So they use very primitive things to get their needs met, whereas hopefully, as adults in romantic relationships, we use more mature approaches like negotiating as opposed to demanding, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah,
So,
and I know both sides of that.
right.
I often tell people, friends of mine, that your mom has rarely ever said no to me when it's a need and I ask.
Yeah.
Demanding, when I used to be more demanding,
Yeah.
didn't go too well.
It usually doesn't. In most cultures, it doesn't go well, right?
No.
So to me, when I think about what people's needs are, I think about those kinds of things, the need, the physical safety needs, but also the psychological need to feel important, to feel special, to feel understood, and things like that. And so as an adult in a
Right.
romantic relationship, my question is always going to be, how are you getting those needs met? Are you aware of them? And then are you negotiating them as kind of my two-part process? Are you aware of them?
Right.
And then can you negotiate them?
Right.
And if you're not aware of them and you can't negotiate them, you'll just be a terrorist, basically. Or you'll be passive,
Well,
you know?
you'll be acting out something.
Yeah,
You'll be acting out something. You'll withdraw.
exactly.
You'll act out somehow as an adult would act out.
Yeah.
If you're not able to recognize the needs you have and search for those, because your spouse isn't necessarily going to know what those are.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to know what you need so you can speak up for yourself and get them met. I mean, obviously that's the ideal,
Yeah.
but many people fall way short. I know what I need. I've learned over the years and years that what I need is very simple.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So give me some respect. Oh, feed me too for guys. I be fed too. That's a real good one for me. But they're pretty simple. And I know your mom. She wants to be understood. Listen to me. Appreciate what I've done. She was tired last night because she's been helping our HOA do a lot of research to change management companies, and she's done a lot of the work. And some of my appreciation was just buying her an anniversary ring for all the work she's been doing for the HOA, which has been a lot for me, for them, and appreciation goes a long way, so when she says she's tired, I'm going, I know you have to be. You got to be tired, and simple
Sure.
things like that mean so much. And when you don't do it, if it's not done enough, the other person's left in pain, a need unfulfilled. That's basic. And again, we're talking about needs. We're not talking about wants. Not talking about wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, the want's the Lexus in the garage for her. That's not a want, or that's not a need. That's a want. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? That kind of thing. So, but let's touch on wants for a minute, and then we'll get to more of the
Okay.
stuff you've been touching on too, with things
Sure.
getting away.
Yeah.
And it's all. I tell people it's all right to want things. It's all right to want all
Anything.
kinds of things.
It's all right to
Yeah.
want anything. Yeah, in my
Well,
opinion.
I wouldn't go quite that far.
Well, I would.
I know.
I certainly would for various reasons. I've got a number of reasons, but we can get to that.
Yeah. Okay. But so I don't need your mom to be certain things that she's not.
Yeah.
That would be more of a want. You know what I'm saying? But I do need to respect, and do need to get laid, and do need I do need some things. You know what I'm saying? So and at times be heard and understood.
Hmm.
Which she can be very good at if I can say it.
Yeah.
And ask, that kind of thing. So anyway, but there's a lot of wants people have. They want a bigger house. They want better this, better that, and all that kind of stuff may make a person feel good. Maybe
Yeah.
for more as them to have a different car, different house, different neighborhood, different whatever job, whatever case may be.
Yeah.
And some of that we can get,
Yeah.
but a lot of it a spouse cannot provide for you. They cannot provide that for you, and you have to live within some limitations based on income, circumstances, like maybe you can't get a bigger house. Maybe you can't get a different car, at least for a
Mm.
while, or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's really, the way I'm talking about, it's really important to understand the difference between needs and wants. Needs are going to keep you going. Wants may make you feel good for a while. I call it the new car. Or it acknowledges who you are, certain wants do. Like if you're upper middle class and you're living middle class, you're going to feel better if you're living upper middle class, because it feels more natural to you and right for you. As an example, it's not bad. It's just,
Yeah.
but sometimes you may not be able to get there or get there when you want to be there, So that's what I'm talking about, the difference between the two. And there's many more endless list of examples of wants that are possible for people in a relationship. And if you over focus on those things, it can cause great conflict,
Yeah.
versus what you do and appreciate what you are getting and appreciate what the person does do for you. Every once in a while I have this twinge in me that I'll acknowledge your mom and give her appreciation. I walk away going, I just go do my job. I don't say much about it, but I don't hear a lot about appreciating, what I do in terms of what I bring home income wise. Sometimes that bothers me. I need at times somebody to say something about that, some respect for that. Now, in my case, I know it's God given, God powered, but it's still nice to hear. Yeah, I appreciate what you do and the people you help and things like that. And in my chair, you don't get a lot of that with the kind of treatment that I do with people, and until the end of treatment, which can be a while. You know what I'm saying? So it's nice to hear it at home sometimes. Or be around people like you who do appreciate what I do and respect what I do. And
Right.
it's difficulty and
Hmm.
the effort it takes, things like that.
Yeah.
So but again, so differentiate between wants and needs. The needs, you got to get enough of those met. and there's no reason why you can't unless things get in the way. But before we talk about all the things that get in the way and wreck relationships, let's talk about two other things. The first one is the forgiveness. We did a podcast about forgiveness, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It really important, particularly in this culture, which is a cancel culture, in certain segments anyway. That
Yeah.
if you cannot forgive people, and I heard this recently I think on a podcast. I'm not sure which one, but Hebrew law, Jewish law, said in the old days, you're to forgive 3 times. After 3, you're done. So you can hate the person forever. You can never let them back in your life forever. And then Christ came along and said, how about 7 times 70, which really meant as much as you need to. And I'm on the 7 times 70 thing, that if you don't continue to forgive, because we're going to hurt each other. We just do. We're human. And it's impossible not to get hurt or to hurt others, as we said in that podcast. So the ability to forgive is essential to get on past something and really move past it. And the only way to do that, I know how to do it, is to see your own flaws and to realize you need forgiveness too. And then it becomes easier to forgive the other person. But so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with that. I just believe it's an essential component in a healthy relationship to be able to forgive. And that I don't think is spoken as much of in our culture as it used to be. And I think that's something we're missing more of. Okay, any thoughts about that? I don't want to do a whole deal on
Yeah.
it, but
No, I mean, just briefly, I would say that forgiveness is very useful in relationships. I think it's more emotionally, regardless of the culture nowadays, I think that even historically, it's been extremely difficult for people in many, if not most, especially Western cultures, to engage in forgiveness, despite Christianity and things like that. Because I think that people's priorities are just kind of generally screwed up, just across the board. Because I think people don't
yep.
have to worry about survival as much anymore in industrialized societies. So their priorities become more about the wants that you talk about and less about the needs. And also, I think people just generally are afraid of getting their needs met. I think that we don't live in a culture, or most cultures, that have role models of various kinds, whether it's TV shows or movies, plays, musicals, or even like regular families, where honoring your needs and getting your needs met is priority number one. I think for the most part, that is secondary or tertiary in most Western societies for the last probably 120 years, something like that. Because I think we start to look at other things more importantly, politics and money and all these things.
Stuff.
So, yeah, stuff
Yeah,
and things, basically.
yeah.
And nothing wrong with stuff and things. I like stuff and things. It's just, I think I get more out of hanging out and watching a movie together and kind of getting those needs met to be silly and relaxed together than I get out of like a fancy new car. I certainly love cars, you know that about me,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
a Ferrari is not going to allow me to have a meaningful life. It's going to be a toy, right?
No,
Like the next
yeah.
Porsche that I buy
Right.
is going to be fun, but it's not going to allow me to sleep better at night or feel like I'm going somewhere in the world or contributing to the world, you know? So I think people have lost sight of that, which means that in their families, in our media, we don't care about needs, we care about wants more than anything. So why would you forgive?
No,
Because
I
forgiveness is
one.
about needs, it's not about wants, right?
Amen. And I agree with
Because
you. When we had to work for survival,
yeah,
you had to forgive the other person because you had to work together. Now you can be
right.
bitter and still work
Yeah.
together to survive,
Yeah.
but you're more likely to again feel that pressure to forgive so you can get along so you can survive.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think our culture is out of whack in terms of what our priorities are. Toys and all that stuff. Even I throw education in there too, by the way. It's not a need. It's a want in a lot of cases, and a lot of
Hmm.
people should be going to trade schools and not to college because they really don't have that need. Some people do. You did. I
Yeah,
did. But a
sure.
lot of people don't. It's overused. But anyway, but the priorities are important. So, but forgiveness is really important. Not 3 times, ongoing, ongoing as you need to. And again, remember, forgiveness doesn't mean putting up with unacceptable behavior. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness
Correct.
is cleaning out, letting go pain, forgiving the other person to move on, but that does not mean accepting unacceptable behavior. Just remember that. Then the
Yeah.
last one I put before we get into all the issues of wreck relationships, the ability to stand up for yourself and to the other person in a healthy way, which I think has a lot to do with deserving to get your needs met.
Mm.
And also then to meet their needs, because is love all about getting? A lot of people think it is. You're supposed to make me happy. No, no. I'm supposed to know how to be happy and bring that to the relationship. And I'm supposed to
Mm.
think about what your mom needs, not just about what I need. My needs are important too, but to love, I believe, in a large measure is to give. And if you give, often you get. And it really works that way in a lot of cases. Not all cases, obviously. So there's a lot of reasons why, but it's important to think about, can I do it? If I don't deserve it, I may not be able to live it out. But if I deserve to get respect, then I'll make sure that I am respected in a relationship. If I deserve to be understood, then I'll assert myself to be understood. But if I don't deserve it, I may not assert myself, and the need may stay there, but it never gets met, and that causes pain, and that's not good for the
Mm.
relationship, right?
Right.
So things like that. Anything else about that? The deserving and standing up for yourself?
I just think deserving is a very deep thing that it's easy to say, but hard to understand. So I encourage everyone to be extremely patient and be open to figuring out what that really means. Because I don't think it's
Yeah.
something you can just kind of know at the age of 15 or 30 or whatever it is. It's something
You
you
can't
develop.
know it. I'll talk to my patients and I'll say to them, and they don't get this at first until they start feeling it. I'll go, you'll have more power to resolve the conflict once you feel deserving. And they don't get that. They get, well, I am standing up for myself. Well, you're not resolving the conflict. So you must not
Yeah.
feel very deserving, because if you do, you can take it to the conclusion and you're
Yeah.
much,
So,
much, much more likely to get what you need.
so just to plant a flag that people can come back to,
We'll
like
talk more
this is
about it.
the
Yeah,
the
we'll talk
word
more about
deserving is so layered and stuff that there's no way we could
it.
spend
I
45
know.
minutes on it and make it
No,
make
no, no,
sense to
no, no,
people. Yeah.
no, no.
Especially in an analytic sense, you know what I mean? So,
Well, we'll just wait till the next section. We're not going to have a lot of time to go through a lot of these other than
yeah.
superficially, but what are
Yeah.
the issues that wreck relationships? And I just got a list here. Neglect. If you come from neglect,
Mm.
you're liable to get neglected in a
Yeah.
relationship and
Yeah.
be in great pain. You come from abuse, oh my God. I mean, the classic one is the woman who was sexually abused, molested as a child, keeps getting together with dangerous guys who will treat her poorly. Not necessarily sexually abuse her, but treat her poorly. They may also do that, but she's repeating the abuse over and over again until she can grow enough to understand that she doesn't deserve that word again. She deserves to get what she needs, not to be hurt like she's used to being hurt. That's a classic example of that. I have people I've treated like that have been through all kinds of things where they set themselves up to fail because they're used to being treated badly. So things like that can really wreck relationships. Abandonment. If you're used to abandonment, you may get together with someone who will in fact abandon you because that's what you're expecting. Abandonment. This can be gnarly. These things can be really gnarly, folks. So we're being really superficial about these things just to be able to get through some, give you some ideas.
Yeah.
Well, on unresolved conflict,
Hmm.
if the conflicts are significant, they may not even be conscious to you, but you can be playing them out. And certainly I've done that.
Mm.
My trauma, I played out some nasty stuff with your mom,
Sure.
about women, and not good stuff. And I didn't have a freaking clue until I began to realize that I had great trauma. Didn't
Mm.
have a clue, and I could go on about that a long time, but it's if you're listening, pay attention.
Mm,
You're dealing with someone psychotic, that can be really difficult to maintain a healthy relationship.
right.
That's just a given. If someone's hallucinating, delusional, really hard to stay in a relationship. It can be done. There are times are done if both people work at it. It can be done, and it's wonderful when it can be done, and both people are going to feel good about it. But it's a challenge. Depression, anxiety, that affects relationships when it's severe. Even chronic mild depression can affect a relationship. And then you're looking for the other person to fill the emptiness inside you.
Mm,
And they're not necessarily going to be able to do that.
mm,
You need to be able to be open to getting whatever needs you have filled. But if you're
mm,
used to them not being filled, you can live a long time without them and be very depressed in your relationship with the other person and not know it's really has more to do with you than them, or you're letting them play out something with you. Freud was a lot of things. One of the things he said is repetition compulsion, tendency to repeat earliest life events. Well, people do that in adult relationships from their childhood, and that stuff can really get in the way. And the last one I put on my list, victimhood. No real power to change self or other. There is power by being a victim to control the other lots of times, but it's
mm,
not the kind of power you want to really affect change in oneself and therefore improve the relationship with the other. Victims can be very difficult to deal with, people acting like victims. That's why a
mm-hmm,
lot of people I know used to say, once you're here, no more victims, only volunteers. You're a volunteer if you keep doing it. So you got to
mm,
choose to volunteer to quit being a victim. And as I like to say, then you need to change what keeps you stuck as a victim, which is really security and self worth, typically are really bad. You don't have power to change unless you develop some security and some self worth. And
mm.
then you can get slough off the victim role and have a tremendously different, more productive, enjoyable life. So there's just some things off the top of my head that can really mess up and wreck a relationship. And not stuff you want to wreck a relationship, just stuff you bring with you into the relationship that can help really wreck one. What do you think?
Yeah, I think all of those are very straightforward. And things I might just add to the list
Yeah.
include drugs of various kinds. I think I
Addiction?
personally, no, not
How did I
addiction, just
forget it? Drugs?
not addiction, just drug use of various kinds. I think I
Okay.
have no problem if you want to use drugs. I'm very open to people doing whatever they want to do, whether it's more hard stuff or not. The problem that I think most people don't understand about drugs is drugs don't serve just one purpose when people use them. Drugs usually serve multiple purposes. And so if you're not aware of the particular habit you have, even if you think it's a very mild habit, even if you're like a casual social drinker, I think it's still going to impact your relationship. And I think that that's worth at least understanding. Maybe you don't need to change anything, but you should at least be aware of the way in which this habit might affect your relationship, for instance, right? If you can have a glass of wine with dinner, phenomenal. Love that for you, but also it's having consequences. So drugs is definitely something worth considering. I also think other habits that can wreck relationships include ignorance. I think that a lot of people believe that they don't have to try to understand themselves or other people. I don't know
Or
why.
they don't have to work at it?
Yeah, well, that, if you want to call it that, yeah, but like a lot of people believe that they don't have to try harder to understand themselves or the person they're in a relationship with. And so I think that can be destructive because when we stop investing in attempting to understand ourselves and other people better, because it's always evolving, relationships are always evolving. And so
Right.
when we pretend that we know enough, then I think we start to destroy the relationship, in my opinion. So I think not trying
Yeah.
to understand things, and I don't mean neurotically worrying about the relationship. I mean just like putting a little effort into going, how are things going? You know, that kind of thing. So I think add drugs, add pretending like you know enough. I think also add um, complacency. I think a lot of relationships are
right?
not, maybe not destroyed, but very subpar. I think most people could have better, even if it's just dating, you could have better relationships if you just
Yeah.
got rid of complacency, which kind of relates to my last point, but it's a little different because, you know, general human complacency, the idea that everything is okay right now and I don't really need to do anything differently, whether it's about the gym or if you're a believer of some kind, your relationship with God, or your diet, or your job, or your friendships, or
Right.
whatever, pick a domain of life. If you've like got it handled, then I think you're an idiot, in my opinion. Because like A, none of us are so smart that we know everything we need to know in all these domains. So if you think you got it handled, that tells me you're either very arrogant or very ignorant or both, right? But B,
Right
be
on.
beyond the provocative side of this, the more ordinary version of this conversation is like, you really just want things to be exactly the same? Is that right? You just want things to be precisely, exactly 100% the same?
They don't stay the same.
Well, that's right,
They,
because that's the
yeah,
reality. That's the
yeah,
JFK quote. Like, change is the law of life, JFK said. And like that
yeah.
people take for granted, I think. So I think complacency is not apathy. I think apathy is a little more extreme, but I think complacency is a version of either exhaustion or arrogance or both, you know. And I
Well,
think we should not
many,
be
many,
complacent in
yeah,
relationships,
many
you know?
reasons too. And you made me think of some other ones too when you brought up alcohol and drugs,
Yeah.
gambling, sex, real bad sex compulsions. You
Mm.
know, it
Yeah.
can really betray, wreck relationships. You know, there's an endless list, I guess, but those are certainly some of the big ones can really get in the way. But when I'm trying to wrap this up now, I'm thinking again, no relationship is perfect. If I
Yeah.
see two people and they can fight all the time and stay together, God bless them. I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
live in that relationship, but God bless them if that's what keeps them together. Like the couple I started off talking about, if that keeps you going, all right, great. Good luck. But there's all kinds. People say, well, it has to be 50-50. No, 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 it doesn't. Sometimes it's 80-20, 90-10. I get out of the hospital, my knee replaced. It's about 90-10. Your mom's doing about 90%. I'm doing about 10% at that point. And it shifts back. And sometimes I'll do more, she'll do less of certain things. There's no such thing as a 50-50. You may be there temporarily for a while, but someone's always going to be better at something than the other person is, and hopefully they make up for that with what they do, what they bring too. But there ain't no such thing as 50-50. That's a freaking myth and a fantasy. Well,
Yeah.
I do this and you need to do that. No, no, if it works, it works. If you're getting your needs met, you're getting your needs met, it works. Who cares if it's 70-30, 60-40? Who cares? I
It should
don't.
be evolving, I think, is the way
Yeah,
we should think
well,
about it, is that
right,
it's a dynamic that changes with time and circumstances,
right. For
you
sure.
know?
For sure. But don't have some idealized model in your head of what it should be
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
Just work at it and see the good and make sure you're getting what you need, you know? And I always like to end, for me, of course, God's ways work, man's ways mostly fail unless they're based on God's ways. And I know if I just seek to be happy and just seek that it's all about me, it's not going to be good in a relationship, you know? But if love is to give too, and to really think about the other, 1 Corinthians 13 as an example, things go a lot better. The commitment under God. It drives me a little crazy seeing all these people get married. I'll get my certificate and I can marry you. And it drives me a little crazy because when you're married in the presence of God, I think you take it more seriously than if Ryan Seacrest marries you. as an example, and I like Ryan Seacrest, but I don't want to marry me, man. I want to do it in a formal way that says this is a big deal,
Right.
and the commitment's a big deal, And it is
Right.
for better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and health. Because
Right.
it was not, it ain't going to last.
Right.
It just really isn't going to last.
Right.
So I always want to throw that in for me and people who know me. Do it God's way. His principles do work. I've tried it the other way. Didn't work for me. You know. Any last thoughts there, son?
No.
All right. Well, that's a good place to end. Well, we're going to end for today, and I'm glad you all listened and those who watched. All right.
Thanks for listening to Encouragement for Living Life. We hope you were encouraged by today's discussion. If you have a question, you can email us at lockwoodwithlockwood@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it on one of our shows. Hope to see you next time.